certainly not the first time you've heard that read. I just think back of times, even when I've been preaching, that how many times I've read that at the beginning of a sermon, or I've had children read that at the beginning of a sermon, and I've had adults to read that. It's just something about the 23rd Psalm that no matter how many times you hear it, you seem to find something else. You seem to recognize something more. And I think that probably has a lot to do with where we are at that moment when we read the 23rd Psalm. Now, for me, one thing that just jumped off the page this week to me was that this beautiful, beautiful psalm about the mountaintop experience of having God with you, and God was with you there in the valleys. He prepared a table in the presence of my enemies. All of these beautiful, wonderful truths, they would not be possible. They would not mean as much to us unless we had been in the valley. If we have not experienced a valley, we wouldn't know to appreciate so much being out of the valley. We wouldn't know, if you hadn't been in a place in your life where everything was against you, you felt like your enemies were, everybody had you surrounded, no one was in your corner. By Jesus or God saying here, you prepare a table in the presence of my enemies. That wouldn't mean as much to you because you would not have experienced. So in a very real way, the mountaintop, the beauty of Psalm 23 would not mean as much if we didn't have the valleys that we've walked through. All of us have, had, will continue to have times in the valley. It's just going to be. They're there for different reasons. Sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes it's someone else's fault. Sometimes it's just what happens in life. And the dangerous thing is that when we get in that valley, we can begin to think that's not just a valley we're walking through. This is going to be my permanent existence. That this is all it's ever going to be. And as we conclude our series that we've been doing on 41 will come, we see the valleys. 40 was a big number to God. And in those 40s that he mentions in the Bible, it was always a time of testing or preparation or tough times. And we looked at things like it rained for 40 days for Noah, but 41 came. It stopped raining. We thought about how Goliath taunted the Israelites for 40 days, but 41 came. David came. We think about the 40 days, Eric spoke on it last week, the 40 days of tempting in the wilderness by Satan. But day 41 came. 41 always comes, and it's always a day of celebration and joy and a vindication, deliverance that we get to enjoy in our lives because we've gone through a season of despair, and that's true for Christians and non-Christians. Wayne Cordero is a minister in Hawaii who shared a season of his life when he went into complete burnout. He leads a thriving church, was a writer, publishing books. He traveled worldwide speaking, and he just hit a wall physically, emotionally, spiritually, just hit the wall. And he said he described it, he was lying in his office floor, just unable to move, and was wondering, had God just totally forgotten him? Eventually, through some solitude, some time with God, medical help, support of family, he began to heal. And he wrote this. He says, burnout is not from doing too much. It's from doing too much for too long without replenishing your soul. And his journey mirrors what we learn from the character that we want to talk about today, the Old Testament prophet Elijah. We learn an important truth, and I hope you get this today, if nothing else, this truth here. Even the strongest people of faith can fall into despair. Even the strongest can fall into a time of despair and depression. I want to focus on one event in the life of Elijah, and his life is just filled with unbelievable events. But we're going to focus there in that 1 Kings 18 and 19. We're going to be reading from 1 Kings 19, so if you want to turn there, we'll spend all our time there. But I kind of want to give the background here. This is during the time that Israel has had a drought. It was a God-imposed drought. And It's gone on for several years, and finally God says, bring the false prophets of Baal together, 850, and we're going to have a duel on Mount Carmel. And it says there that they have a duel, and they set up sacrifices, and the prophets of Baal, they prayed and tried all kind of different things to get their gods to call down fire and consume the sacrifice. Went on all day, nothing happened. Elijah gets up and says, douse the wood with water, and he does that 3 times. They prays one simple prayer, and God consumes it with fire from heaven. And then the people gathered the false prophets together, all 850, and killed them, put them to death for leading their nation astray this way. King Ahab was there watching all the things that were happening, and Elijah is so confident in God and what God is going to do. He tells Ahab, he says, you need to get in your chariot. You need to get down off the mountain because it's going to be raining soon, and you won't be able to get off the mountain. And Ahab takes off. Elijah overcomes with supernatural strength. He runs ahead, a distance of anywhere between 17 and 20 miles down the mountain and gets to Jezreel, the city, before Ahab even does. And this is where we pick up now. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Now Ahab, this is the king of Israel, told Jezebel, this is the queen, everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. And she's saying, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to kill you for what you've done. Now Elijah has just defeated 850 prophets, a 850 to 1 duel. He has prayed for rain, and it did rain, ending the drought. And with superhuman endurance runs down the mountain ahead of the chariot. And the threat of, what is the threat of one person supposed to have? What effect is that supposed to have on him? And this is what verse 3 says. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And thus we begin the 40 days of despair that we have. Look at verses 3 through 5. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. Remember that one little line. While he himself went a day's journey into the desert, he came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. Now you tell me if that doesn't have all of the makings of a good country western song. Everybody's against me. The dog doesn't even like me. I'm just going to lay down and die. And that's what he said. And it gives the impression, at least it does to me, that he laid down to go to sleep expecting God to grant his wish, that he would die right there under that tree. Look at verse 5. Go back to the end of verse 5. It says, all at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights, there's our number, until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And it's called the mountain of God because he traveled back. Another name was Mount Sinai. This is the place where Moses received the 10 Commandments. So it's real significance that that's where he goes back to. For Elijah, this was his 40 days of despair. He wanted it to be over. You don't know if he's questioning, God, did I fail you? Or God, did you fail me? What has happened? I thought we had a plan. I thought everything was going to work out great. It's good to know that Elijah wasn't the only follower of God who suffered under this type of pressure. And even when they were just doing what God had asked them to do. And two examples just come to my mind. I think of John the Baptist, who Jesus described himself. Jesus said, the greatest man born of woman. But John the Baptist in prison sent word to Jesus and just said, are you really the Messiah? You know, despair, what it can do to a person. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, he said that the pressure of this ministry of following Christ and doing, he said the pressure of that, the hardships are so great that we don't even feel like we can endure them. And he says, we despaired even of life. This is the Apostle Paul who says this. Elijah was coming off physically and mentally and spiritually a mountaintop experience. I don't say that, no pun intended. It was a mountaintop experience. Greatest event in his life. And then within a day, he's at the rock bottom. How do you go from the mountaintop to the valley that quickly? Michael Phelps, if you recognize that name, is the most decorated American Olympian of all time in the world. But what's left to accomplish when you've won everything that you can possibly win? That you've proved that you're the best in the world over and over. In a 2020 documentary called The Weight of Gold, Michael Phelps said this. He said, talking about other Olympians, he said, we're just so lost. A good 80%, maybe more, of us develop a post-Olympic depression. I thought of myself as just a swimmer and not a human being. And that's where I thought, why don't I just end it all? The mountaintop experience. And then when it was over, he found himself even despairing of life. How did Elijah get to such a place so quickly? Well, some of the things jump right off the pages. If we pay attention, exhaustion. He had been a fugitive for several years. It wasn't the first time that Ahab and Jezebel were trying to kill him, so he had that pressure. He has the duel that lasted all day, and the pressure it goes with all of that on the mountain. But once again, both physically, mentally, emotionally, the whole thing. He runs down the mountain ahead of the chariot, runs that far, and gets back to Jezreel. He's exhausted. He was disillusioned. Very possible he was disillusioned. I hadn't thought about this very much, but he has this duel with the prophets of Baal, and he defeats them. They're killed. But what changed? Ahab and Jezebel are still in power. The evil are still reigning, and they're going to kill him now. And it's like he might just be disillusioned and say, I thought at least the people, they would turn back and see that God is the God of all things, and they would turn back to God. But no, it says they just ramped it up again and said, we're going to kill you. He was alone. I mentioned that to remember that one line. He said he left his servant and he went on further into the wilderness. He was alone. He chose to be alone. And hopelessness. Nothing works. Nothing's better. I gave it my best. He said, I'm just like the rest of my ancestors. I gave it my best, but I failed. Now, don't answer this out loud, but you tell me, have you ever been where he just described? One of those things, a combination of those things, maybe all of those things. You understand how things can look so good on the outside, but maybe you're living in despair. But look at what God does even after giving him rest and giving him food. Look at what God does. 1 Kings 19:9 says this. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? That's a voice that came from heaven. What are you doing here, Elijah? And if we had the time to just keep reading, we'd see that Elijah just lays it all out again. He tells him, well, God, I'm the only one that's trying to do right. I'm the only one around here that's doing anything, and now everything's falling apart, and they're trying to kill me. It's just not working. So he gives him a chance to voice it and say it out. Look what goes on. You skip down to verse 11. After Elijah's voiced all of this, the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Verse 12, after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? I just think it's remarkable that God, in doing all the things he's doing here to deal with Elijah, he gives him a chance. He tells him, he just simply says, I am here. God didn't rebuke him. He didn't fuss at him. He didn't belittle him. He didn't say, it's all over, I'm done with you. He just showed Elijah, hey, I'm right here. I'm right here, Elijah. Sometimes it isn't loud, it isn't boisterous, it isn't in a tremendous miracle, it isn't in a solved problem that we've been praying about, but he reminds us, I am here. I'm right with you in the valley. It was in a whisper. God in all his power decides to reveal himself in a whisper. I'm convinced from my own life, I'm convinced from observation of being a minister so long, that if we would slow down, calm down, and just listen, we would see God working more. If we would close out some of the noise, we would hear the whisper and know God's presence. Maybe not the way we expect him to work or the way we've prayed for him to work, but in the way that he has determined to work. Sometimes he doesn't fix our problems. Sometimes he doesn't take us out of the valley just yet, but he walks with us. He sits with us. I love what he does next here. After listening to Elijah outpouring all of his frustrations and his despair at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, he moves on. God just does this. Look at, he gives him a new mission. 1 Kings 19, starting with verse 15. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Maholah, to succeed you as prophet. Verse 17, Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. I picture just, God just says, I hear you, Elijah. I hear your lament. I hear your cries. You've told me several times now how you feel. But here's what we're going to do. You're going to go back the way you came. You're going to get back in the game. There's a time that you spend in that and voicing that in despair. But he says, get back in the game. You think you're alone, Elijah? Well, I'm going to tell you, I've already got the next king picked out. I've already even got the next prophet who will take your place picked out. I've got the next king of another country picked out. And they're all going to work together and bring about the justice that you don't think was done. And on top of that, Elijah, You think you're the only one? Let me tell you something. 7,000 that you don't even know about. 7,000 that you don't even know about. I know their names, who have not bowed down to Baal. God just says, get back in the game. I've heard you. I know you can't see my presence right now. You're blinded by these things, but I'm going to get you back in the game. Louis Zamperini was an Olympic runner in the 1930s. He was able to compete in one Olympics and was set to appear in the 1940 Olympics, but World War II broke out. He enlisted and became a bombardier on a U.S. bomber, a B-24. His story is that he was shot, the plane crashed over the Pacific Ocean. He and 2 other members of the flight crew floated in the ocean for 47 days. They were rescued, only to be rescued by the Japanese Navy. They were sent to a prisoner of war camp. And when he got there, conditions were terrible to begin with. But he was recognized by one of the officers there because he was an Olympian as well. And he was recognized by this Japanese officer, and he took particular joy in persecuting and torturing Louis Zamperini. And so he made his life miserable and put him through a terrible ordeal. And in the movie Broken, a 2000 movie Broken, you see this story played out. I'd recommend anybody seeing that. He survived just simply because of his determination, his strength, and the war ended. He came back home recognized as a hero, but he came back a broken man, suffering from PTSD, sank into alcoholism, could not sleep, could not function, and his marriage was hanging on by a thread. And at his wife's urging, Cynthia, she urged him to attend a Billy Graham crusade with her. And it was at that crusade, as he sat there in that crowd, he remembered a vow he made to God when he was floating in that raft for 47 days. He said, God, if you'll get me through this, I'll serve you. And he had not followed through with that. And so there began the time that he dedicated his life to God. He gave his life to God. And he began to get back in the game. He began to teach and preach forgiveness and acceptance and moving on. He even went back to Japan, where he was given the opportunity to go to a prisoner of war camp there for Japanese war criminals. And he went there and visited and told them and preached and taught forgiveness and told them, I forgive you for the things you did. He even attempted to get in touch with the one who had persecuted and tortured him personally, but the man would not allow it. He would not meet with him. He came back. He set up a foundation, the Louis Zamperini Foundation, where he was a troubled teen himself. He set up a foundation that still exists today that helps young, troubled boys. He simply got back in the game. And it saved him from the despair that he was in. It gave him a renewed purpose, a renewed mission in life. And that renewed mission may save your life. Now I want to close with just a couple of things. I don't know what we want to say, suggestions or observations that we can do when we find ourselves in depression, despair. And it's just 3 simple things. One is that find peace. Find rest for your soul. Find rest for your soul. Another example is C.S. Lewis, a great Christian writer. He suffered and battled with despair and depression. At one point, he said this. He says, it is easier to say, my tooth hurts, than it is to say, my heart is broken. But if you read the Psalms, particularly the Psalms, they are dripping with people who are in despair and are calling out to God. It's as if God gives us permission by including the Psalms in the Bible. It's like He's given us permission, an avenue to voice our despair. To say to God, I am broken, I am hurting, I don't know what to do. And to voice it to Him. And to find peace and rest for your soul that way. Second thing I would observation and suggestion is this, is find friends and be a friend. I've said this my entire life. When you don't feel like going to church, when you don't feel like going to Sunday school, when you don't feel like going to Bible study, when you don't feel like being with people, that's when you need to do all of those things. That is your soul telling you something is wrong. Get with people. And every one of us have got up on a Sunday morning, went to bed on a Saturday night and said, I don't think I'm going to go tomorrow. I just don't feel like it. That's the time you're to be there. Surround yourself with people who can lift you up. Surround yourself with the teaching, the preaching, and the prayers, and the coming around the Lord's table. All of those things that can build you up and lift you up. That's the time. And be a friend. Even if you're depressed, be a friend to somebody. And God will bring you through these things. Despair does not have to rule us. And the final thing is this, is find a purpose. Maybe your life is not where you thought it would be. Maybe it's taken a terrible turn and you're down, you're out. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a way forward. That God's not gonna find you in a new mission, something to do. I ran across this quote this week. I thought it was so tremendous. God, in His mysterious sovereignty, uses vessels of clay, not vessels of gold. He uses vessels of clay, not vessels of gold. What that says to me is we don't have to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be everything together all the time. But God wants to work with us and mold us with our imperfections and all the things that come with just being human. God wants imperfect people. So if you're sitting here and say, if I get everything together, I'm going to give my life to Christ, man, you're totally missing it. God wants you in your imperfect self so that He can work with you. This church wants imperfect people. So if you're sitting there saying, well, I could never be a member here, I could never serve or volunteer because I mess up so many things, whatever, you got that wrong. The church wants imperfect people because we're imperfect people. So wherever you are on these things, find your purpose and go after it. As God said to Elijah, go back the way you came. Get back in the game. I pray as if you're considering giving your life to Christ or placing your membership or whatever it is, that you'll move, that you'll do it, and you'll see how God will work in your life.